I never meant to shred him, to watch my words slice him open like that. But when Mark stormed out, slamming the door in our Brooklyn brownstone, the look on his face was a brutal truth. I'd crossed some invisible line and there was no going back. Mark, my Mark, had always been the bedrock, unflappable, infuriatingly calm even when life threw its curveballs. That calm used to be my anchor, but lately it felt like stagnation, a refusal to see the wreckage piling up around us. It started 6 months ago, the day the axe fell at the logistics firm. Corporate bloodbath, they called it. Just numbers, but numbers turned into overdue notices and a bank account that looked like a ghost town. At first, I played the supportive wife, sunshine and pep talks, telling him it was just a detour, he'd land on his feet. But weeks bled into months, the job hunt went nowhere, and my patience frayed thinner than a cheap thread. That night, the tension was a live wire at the dinner table. Mark was hunched over his plate, barely picking at the pasta while I watched, arms clamped tight across my chest. Silence, thick and suffocating until I snapped. "Are you even trying?" The words ripped out, sharper than I intended. Mark flinched, eyes jumping up. "What?" "You heard me," I leaned in, voice tight. "Are you actually trying to find a job, or are you just waiting for manna from heaven?" His jaw clenched, eyes narrowed to slits. "Of course I'm trying, Sarah. You think I enjoy this?" "Doesn't look like it," I shot back, the dam of frustration bursting. 6 months, Mark, 6 months, and we're drowning while you just exist." "I'm not just existing," he growled, voice rising for the first time in what felt like forever. "Do you have any clue how many resumes I've sent, how many interviews?" "Clearly not enough!" The words hung in the air, a physical blow. Mark's face went white, hands fisted on the table. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd explode, unleash the rage I knew simmered beneath that calm. Instead, he pushed back his chair, slow, deliberate movements. "You think I like this?" His voice was low, dangerous. "You think I don't feel like a goddamn failure every single day? Then do something about it," I yelled, voice cracking, raw anger shaking me. He didn't answer, just grabbed his worn leather jacket from the back of his chair, headed for the door. "Where are you going?" I demanded, scrambling up. "Out," he said, flat, dead. Then the door slammed, the sound echoing through the suddenly cavernous apartment. Deafening silence. I stood there, chest heaving, heart hammering, a furious tattoo against my ribs. I knew I'd gone too far. The words had landed like shrapnel, tearing him apart. Part of me, a dark, ugly part, didn't care. I was drowning in my own fear, my own sense of helplessness, too numb for guilt. An hour later, I was still planted on the couch, nursing a glass of cheap wine, replaying the argument, each word a fresh wound. A knock on the door. Frowning, I set down the glass, walked over, and yanked it open. David, Mark's best friend, standing on my doorstep, hands buried deep in the pockets of his ridiculous cashmere coat, concern etched on his annoyingly perfect face. "Sarah," he said, voice warm, too familiar. "Thought I'd drop by, see if Mark was around." "He's out," I mumbled, stepping back to let him in. David raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, but let it drop. "Rough night?" "You could say that," I muttered, heading back to the couch. David followed, settling across from me. He'd always been the golden boy, the one who made it look effortless. Mark, steady, reliable, working his decent but unremarkable job. David, scaling the real estate ladder, building a goddamn empire in Manhattan. Charming, too, in that way that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he talked to you. And right now, all that laser focus was on me. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, leaning forward, eyes intense. I hesitated, then the words just spilled out. A torrent of frustration, fear, the ugly argument, Mark's inertia, our crumbling finances. David listened, nodding at all the right moments, his expression a mask of sympathy. "You're under a lot of pressure, Sarah," he said when I finally ran out of steam. "It's only natural to feel overwhelmed." "Yeah, well, I didn't exactly handle it with grace," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "No one's perfect," David said, tone reassuring, too smooth. "But you shouldn't have to carry this weight alone, Sarah. You deserve stability, someone who can make you feel secure." I looked up, startled by the sudden intensity in his voice. His eyes locked on mine, and for a dizzying second, something flickered between us, something I hadn't felt in years. Desire. I shook my head, trying to shove the thought back into its box. "Mark's trying," I said weakly. "I know he is." Trying isn't always enough, David said softly, gaze unwavering. His hand brushed mine, a casual, almost accidental touch, but it sent a jolt of electricity straight up my arm. The air in the room thickened, charged with something unspoken, dangerous. I should have pulled away, ended it right there, but I didn't. When David stayed, even after Mark was gone, I told myself it was just friendship, concern for a friend's wife. But the way his voice dropped to a lower register, the lingering warmth of his hand on mine, it wasn't friendship. It was something else entirely. I'd expected to be alone, drowning in wine and self-pity after Mark's dramatic exit. But David didn't seem to be in any rush to leave. He shrugged off his cashmere monstrosity, draped it over a chair like he owned the place, and settled in, all casual confidence. "You know," he said, leaning back, "I've known Mark for years, and I can count on one hand the times I've seen him actually lose his temper." I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. "Yeah, well, guess I pushed him too far." David tilted his head, studying me, a predatory glint in his eyes. "You're hard on him." It wasn't judgment exactly, but it wasn't exactly neutral either. "I know," I admitted, the guilt gnawing again. "But it's been so much. The bills, the uncertainty, the constant waiting. I feel like everything's falling apart, and I'm the only one holding it together." David nodded, expression thoughtful. "It's not easy being the strong one, is it?" The way he said it, something loosened in my chest. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to just see it, to acknowledge the weight I was carrying. "No," I said softly, the word barely a whisper. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bridging the space between us. "You've always struck me as someone who knows what she wants, someone who doesn't settle." The words caught me off guard, a strange compliment in this mess. "What are you trying to say, David?" He smiled, a faint, knowing curve of his lips, eyes locked on mine. "Just that you deserve more than this, Sarah, more than feeling like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." His words were like a balm on a raw wound, soothing and dangerous. I took a sip of wine, trying to focus on anything but the warmth spreading through me, the dangerous pull of his attention. "I'm not saying Mark's a bad guy," David continued, tone measured, careful. "He's one of my oldest friends. But maybe he's not giving you what you need right now." I looked at him sharply, heart hammering a frantic rhythm. "What are you trying to do here, David?" He didn't flinch, just held my gaze. "I'm just being honest." Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I should have told him to leave, shut this down before it spiraled out of control. But I didn't. I stayed silent, trapped, maybe even wanting to be. David leaned back again, movement slow, deliberate. "Do you remember that dinner we all had? Giovanni's? Last summer." I blinked, thrown by the sudden shift in topic. "Yeah, I remember." "You were laughing so much that night," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I don't think I'd seen you like that in years." I frowned, unsure where he was going with this. "It was just a good night, I guess." "No," David said, voice softer now, intimate. "It wasn't just the night, it was you. You were glowing, Sarah, like you didn't have the weight of the world on your shoulders for once." The apartment felt warmer, the space between us shrinking, even though neither of us had moved. I shifted on the couch, setting my wine glass down on the coffee table, a clink that seemed deafening in the sudden quiet. "You know," David continued, tone low, almost a murmur, "I always wondered how someone like you ended up with someone like Mark." "David," I warned, voice trembling slightly. He held up his hands, a small, apologetic smile. "I'm not trying to start anything. I think you deserve to be reminded of who you are, what you're worth." His hand brushed mine again, lighter this time, fleeting, but it sent a shockwave through me. I should have pulled away. I should have stood up, told him to get out. But instead I looked down at our hands, at the way his fingers lingered near mine. "David," I said softly, voice barely a whisper. "Yes?" I looked up, met his gaze. His eyes were dark, intense, filled with something I couldn't name, but didn't want to escape. "This isn't right," I said, the words lacking any real conviction. "Maybe not," he said, voice low and even. "But does it feel wrong?" My breath hitched, chest tightening. I tried to find the words, the right words to stop this, to push him away, but nothing came. David shifted closer, movement slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to pull back, to say no. His hand covered mine, warm, steady. And when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible, a breath against my skin. "Tell me to leave, Sarah," he said, eyes locked on mine. "And I will." I opened my mouth, ready to say it, to tell him to go, to end this before it went too far, before I crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But I didn't. The soft clink of my wine glass hitting the table was the only sound that broke the silence. David leaned in, face inches from mine. "You've been holding it together for so long," he murmured, voice thick with something I couldn't decipher. "Let someone else carry it for a while." His words were a drug, a dangerous promise. And before I could stop myself, I leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like he was testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, it deepened, his hands sliding to the back of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair. For a moment, the weight of everything, the bills, the arguments, the suffocating tension, just vanished. All I could feel was the heat of his touch, the way he made me feel seen, wanted, cherished, even. But just as quickly as it began, reality crashed back down, a cold wave of guilt and fear. I pulled away, breath coming in ragged gasps. "I can't," I whispered, shaking my head. "This isn't fair to Mark." David didn't look angry or hurt, just nodded, expression calm, almost knowing. "I understand," he said softly. But as he stood, reaching for his coat, his hand brushed mine one last time, and the look in his eyes told me this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I told myself it was a momentary lapse, a weakness, that David's touch, his words, were just a fleeting escape. But when Mark left again that night and David came back, I knew the line I swore I wouldn't cross was already a distant memory. Mark was gone most of the next day, out the door early, muttering something about a lead at a warehouse in Queens. But I saw the set of his jaw, the slump of his shoulders as he grabbed his jacket. No goodbye kiss, no backward glance, just the click of the door closing, a finality that chilled me to the bone. I watched him pull out of the driveway, and for a fleeting moment, the familiar pang of guilt twisted in my gut. He was trying, wasn't he? Out there, scrambling, desperate to fix the mess we were in. But then the memory of last night flooded back, David's hand on mine, the lingering heat of his kiss, the way he'd made me forget everything else. And with that memory, something else bloomed, a dark, forbidden thrill. The hours crawled by, the weight of the empty apartment pressing down. I cleaned, I worked on a design project I'd been putting off for weeks, anything to distract myself. But no matter what I did, my mind kept drifting back to David. When the doorbell rang just after 6, I wasn't surprised. I opened the door, and there he was, leaning against the doorframe, casual in dark jeans and a fitted sweater, hands tucked in his pockets. That same confident, easy smile that made it impossible to look away. "David," I said, voice a shaky whisper, "what are you doing here?" "Figured you could use some company," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I should have stopped him, should have told him to leave. But instead, I closed the door behind him, the soft click echoing in the quiet apartment. "Aren't you worried Mark will come back?" I asked, trying to sound more composed than I felt. David shrugged, leaning against the kitchen counter, infuriatingly relaxed. "Mark's out job hunting, right? He'll be gone for hours." The casual way he said it made my stomach twist, a sickening mix of excitement and dread. "This isn't a good idea," I said, but I didn't move to stop him when he stepped closer. "Maybe not," he said, voice low, eyes locking on mine. "But does it feel like a bad one?" His hand brushed mine, light, fleeting, and my resolve crumbled. There was something about David, something magnetic, undeniable. He had a way of making you feel like you were the center of his world, like nothing else mattered but you. "David, I started, but he cut me off, voice soft but firm. "Tell me to leave, Sarah," he said, stepping even closer. "If that's what you want, I'll walk out that door and never look back." I opened my mouth to say it, to tell him to go, but the words caught in my throat, because I didn't want him to leave. He closed the distance between us, hands sliding to the back of my neck, touch gentle but commanding. His lips brushed against mine, tentative at first, giving me one last chance to pull away, but I didn't. The kiss deepened, his hands moving to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space between us. My heart hammered, breath hitching, his touch igniting something in me I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just desire, it was validation, a reminder that I was still seen, still wanted. We moved to the living room, the tension between us building with every breath, every touch. David guided me to the couch, hands steady, movements deliberate. He was careful, patient, like he was savoring every moment, and it made my chest tighten with something I couldn't name. "This isn't fair," I whispered, voice trembling. "To who?" he murmured, lips brushing my collarbone. "To Mark, to any of us," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow, weightless. David pulled back slightly, hand cupping my cheek, eyes searching mine. "Do you want me to stop?" I hesitated, breath catching. The rational part of me screamed yes, begged me to end this before it went too far, before I destroyed everything. But the part of me that was drowning, suffocating in resentment and loneliness, whispered no. The rest of the world faded away. David's touch was firm but gentle, lips trailing a path down my neck, hands exploring with a confidence that left me breathless. I clung to him, hands tangling in his shirt, body arching into his, as if he were the lifeline I didn't know I needed. Every kiss, every touch, electric, like I was coming alive after years of being numb. He moved with purpose, but there was no rush, no urgency, like he wanted to memorize every inch of me, to leave a mark no one else could erase. When it was over, we lay tangled on the couch, the room silent except for the sound of our ragged breathing. David's arm was draped over my waist, fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, voice gentle. I nodded, though my chest felt tight, a knot of emotions I couldn't unravel. "Yeah," I said quietly. He tilted my chin up, eyes meeting mine. "I meant what I said, Sarah. You deserve better than this." His words sent a pang of guilt through me, a sharp, unwelcome reminder of Mark, of everything I was betraying. But I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. All I could do was lie there, trapped in the tangled sheets and the weight of what we'd done. The clock on the wall blinked 10:15 when I finally sat up, the reality of the situation crashing down like a tidal wave. Mark could be home any minute. The thought of him walking in, seeing this, seeing us, made my stomach churn. "I should go," David said, sitting up beside me, sensing the shift. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea." He stood, pulling on his jacket, movement slow, deliberate. When he turned back to me, expression unreadable, he said, "This doesn't have to be the end." I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. All I could do was watch as he walked to the door and let himself out, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of the apartment. When Mark came home an hour later, his face was etched with exhaustion, but his eyes held a flicker of something, hopeful. He kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and sat down at the table to eat the reheated leftovers I'd left for him. I tried to act normal, to plaster a fake smile on my face, to pretend everything was fine. But every time he looked at me, every time he reached across the table to take my hand, I felt the weight of my betrayal crushing me. And for the first time, a chilling fear crept in. Had I crossed a line I could never come back from? I thought I'd hidden it well. Thought David and I had erased every trace of what happened. But when Mark came home early the next night, stood in the doorway of our bedroom staring at me like a stranger, I knew everything I'd feared was about to explode. Mark had been distant since the argument, a cold wall between us. But his quiet demeanor wasn't new. He'd always been the kind of man who kept his emotions bottled up, never one for outbursts or dramatic scenes. That's why it felt safe, dangerously so. I'd assumed he wouldn't push, wouldn't question. That evening, he'd left the apartment again, saying something about a lead on a job in Long Island City. I wished him luck, guilt tightening my chest, but I didn't let it show. I needed him to believe everything was normal. I definitely didn't expect him to come home early. David arrived just after Mark left, bolder this time, stepping inside like he belonged there, grin sly and easy. "You're lucky," he said, shrugging off his jacket, tossing it carelessly onto the couch. "I had some time to kill. Thought I'd come by and check on you." "Check on me?" I repeated, folding my arms across my chest, a defensive posture. He moved closer, eyes locking on mine, that same unnerving intensity. "You seemed tense last time. Wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine," I said, but the lie caught in my throat, a strangled sound. "Are you?" he asked, voice soft, coaxing. I didn't answer. It didn't take long for the conversation to shift, to veer off course. David had a way of doing that, of chipping away at my defenses, of breaking down every barrier I tried to erect. "Tell me something, Sarah," he said, leaning against the counter, watching me like a predator stalking its prey. "When was the last time someone made you feel like you mattered? Like you were more than just someone's wife?" "David, stop. I'm serious," he pressed, stepping closer, hand finding mine, his touch warm, possessive. You deserve to feel seen, Sarah. And if Mark can't do that, why shouldn't someone else? My breath hitched, chest tightening. I tried to pull away to break the spell, but his grip tightened. This is a mistake, I whispered, the words barely audible. Maybe, he said, voice low, dangerous, but it doesn't feel like one. It was all too familiar. The heat of his touch, the way his lips moved against mine, confident, demanding, leaving no room for doubt. I let myself get lost in it again, the guilt shoved aside by the intoxicating thrill of being wanted, of being desired. We didn't go far this time, didn't need to. The couch became our refuge, his hands roaming with a familiarity that made my skin flush, his kisses deeper, hungrier. But then I heard it, the soft, unmistakable click of the front door opening. My heart stopped. David froze above me, body tensing, eyes snapping towards the doorway. And there was Mark, standing there, key still clutched in his hand, face pale, expressionless. For a frozen moment, the three of us were suspended in silence, the weight of what was happening crashing down, a suffocating wave of shame and fear. Mark, I whispered, voice trembling. He didn't respond. No yell, no scream, not even anger, just stared, eyes empty, jaw tight. David stood slowly, adjusting his shirt, his usual confidence visibly shaken. Mark, he said, voice steady but guarded. It's not what it looks like. Mark's laugh was sharp, bitter, cutting through the thick tension like a shard of glass. Really, David? That's the best you've got? It's not what it looks like? Look, man, David started, hand raised in a placating gesture, but Mark held up a hand, silencing him. Don't, Mark said, voice low, cold, deadly calm. Just don't. He turned his gaze to me then, and the look in his eyes made my stomach churn. Not anger, not betrayal, something worse. Disappointment. How long? He asked, tone flat, devoid of emotion. Mark, how long? He repeated, voice rising just enough to make me flinch. I swallowed hard, throat dry, heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. It was just once, I stammered, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything, he repeated, voice dripping with sarcasm, with a pain that was almost unbearable to witness. You're sitting here with my best friend, practically naked, and you're telling me it didn't mean anything. Mark, please, I begged, tears streaming down my face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen. But it did, he said sharply, voice cracking. David took a step forward, hands raised again. Look, Mark, let's just talk about this, okay? No need to make it worse than it already is. Mark's eyes snapped to David, and for a split second I thought he might lunge at him, finally unleash the rage that had been simmering beneath the surface. But instead, he took a deep, shuddering breath, hands clenching into fists at his sides. Get out, Mark said, voice low, shaking with barely contained fury. Mark, I started reaching out. Get out! Mark repeated, louder this time, eyes fixed on David. David hesitated, gaze flicking to me, a flicker of something. Concern? Pity? But when Mark took a step towards him, David grabbed his jacket and bolted, disappearing out the door without another word. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the suddenly empty apartment, and then it was just the two of us. Silence. Deafening, suffocating, the weight of it pressing down, crushing me. Mark didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, staring at the spot where David had been, his back rigid, unyielding. Mark, I said softly, voice trembling, pleading. Please, let me explain. He turned to me then, expression unreadable, eyes cold, distant. Explain what, Sarah? That you've been sneaking around with my best friend? That you've been lying to me while I've been out there trying to fix our life, trying to save us? I'm sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face, hot and shame-filled. Sorry doesn't fix this, he said, voice hard, flat. Sorry doesn't undo what you've done. I wanted to reach for him, to beg him to forgive me, to tell him I'd fix it, whatever it took. But the look on his face stopped me cold. I thought I knew you, he said, voice quiet, but laced with a pain that ripped through me. I thought I could trust you. You can, I said desperately, voice cracking. I made a mistake, Mark, a terrible mistake, but I love you. I want to fix this. Fix this, he repeated, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping his lips. How do you fix something like this, Sarah? How do you fix breaking someone's trust? I didn't have an answer. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence stretching between us, a chasm widening, impossible to bridge. Finally, he shook his head, jaw tight, eyes still distant. I need time, he said, voice strained, raw. I need space. Mark, just don't, he said sharply, cutting me off. And then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the bedroom, leaving me standing alone in the wreckage of everything we'd built, everything I'd destroyed. I'd thought Mark's silence was just him processing, trying to make sense of the chaos I'd unleashed, maybe even, I desperately hoped, considering forgiveness. I was wrong. The quiet wasn't acceptance, it was strategy, and I didn't realize that until it was far too late. The next few days were a living hell. Mark barely acknowledged my existence. Breakfast was eaten in strained silence. He left for hours without a word. Came home late with that same stoic mask that made my stomach clench. At first, I clung to the hope that he just needed space, that he was grieving, wrestling with the impossible decision of whether our marriage was salvageable. But the longer the silence stretched, the colder it became, the more I understood. Mark wasn't just pulling away. He was shutting me out completely. One morning, I was making coffee, the familiar ritual suddenly feeling alien, when Mark walked into the kitchen. No greeting, no glance, just grabbed his travel mug, filled it, movement sharp, mechanical. Mark, I said softly, voice hesitant, pleading. He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. Please, I tried again, voice trembling. Can we just talk? I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken everything, but I want to fix this. I need to fix this. He finally looked at me then, eyes like ice, cold and unreadable. You want to fix this? He asked, tone sharp, devoid of warmth. Then why don't you start by being honest, for once? I am being honest, I choked out, tears welling up again, useless, pathetic. He laughed, a short, bitter sound shaking his head in disgust. Honest? Right. Because you were so honest when you let David into this apartment, when you let him touch you, when you lied to my face every single day. Mark, please, I begged, voice breaking. It was a mistake. No, he snapped, cutting me off, voice like a whip. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. What you did, that wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. The words hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath. He was right. I had chosen David, even if just for a moment. A reckless, devastating moment. I had chosen to betray Mark, to shatter everything we had. And now I was drowning in the consequences. But there was something else in his voice, something darker, colder than just anger. Where are you going? I asked, fear twisting in my gut as he grabbed his keys. To handle something, he said flatly. And then he was gone, leaving me standing there, hollowed out, terrified. Later that afternoon, the text message from David shattered the fragile remnants of my denial. Your husband showed up at my office today. You need to call me. Panic flared, hot and suffocating. I called David immediately, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. What happened? I asked as soon as he answered, voice tight with dread. Mark came by, unannounced, David said, voice strained, tight. Walked right into my office, told me he knows everything. Knows everything? I whispered, the blood draining from my face. He knows about us, Sarah, everything. Said I have two options. Either I step back from my business dealings with him, or he makes sure everyone in the city knows what happened. What does that mean? I asked, voice barely audible. It means your husband is playing hardball, David said bitterly. He's threatening to go public, Sarah, with everything. The affair, my reputation, my clients, my deals, it's all on the line. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me, the world spinning out of control. What are you going to do? I asked, voice trembling. David sighed, a long, weary sound. What choice do I have? If I fight back, he'll destroy me. He knows things, Sarah. He knows how to do it. But I'm not going to let him intimidate me completely either, David continued, voice hardening. He needs to know this isn't just about him, about his bruised ego. What does that mean? I asked, a cold dread settling in my stomach. It means he can't control this, Sarah, David said, voice firm, resolute. You and I, what we have, it's not his decision to make. When I hung up, I felt more lost, more terrified than ever. Mark's silence wasn't just pain, it was calculated. He was using me as leverage against David. And as much as I wanted to believe it was just his way of coping, of lashing out in hurt and anger, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was something darker, more deliberate. That night, Mark came home late again. I waited for him in the living room, hands clasped tight in my lap, trying to steady my breathing, to gather the courage to confront him. "We need to talk," I said as soon as he walked in, voice trembling but firm. He didn't respond, just shrugged off his coat, hung it on the rack, movement slow, deliberate, ignoring me. "Mark," I said, voice rising, desperate, "I know you went to see David." He froze, back to me before turning slowly, eyes flat, devoid of emotion. "So he told you?" "Of course, he told me," I said, voice trembling. "What are you doing, Mark? What's your plan here?" "My plan?" he repeated, voice calm, too calm, but sharp, dangerous. "My plan is to make sure the two of you don't get away with this." "I'm not trying to get away with anything," I said desperately, tears welling up again. "I just want to make things right." "Make things right?" he said, a bitter, hollow laugh. "How do you make things right, Sarah? By erasing what you did? By pretending like it never happened?" "I don't know," I admitted, tears streaming down my face, hot, useless tears. "But I can't lose you, Mark. I can't lose us." He stared at me for a long moment, expression unreadable, eyes cold, distant. Finally, he shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "You already lost me, Sarah," he said, voice flat, dead. "The moment you let him into this apartment, into our life, you lost me." "Then why are you still here?" I asked, voice breaking, raw with pain. "Because this isn't just about you," he said coldly, eyes narrowing, hardening. "This is about me, about taking back control of my life, my dignity." His words cut deeper than anything he'd said before, and I realized then, with a chilling certainty, that Mark wasn't just angry, he was vengeful. Over the next few days, Mark's behavior grew more calculated, more chilling. He started making decisions about our lives, our finances, our future, without even a glance in my direction. Asserting control in subtle, insidious ways. Stopped asking about my day, stopped acknowledging my presence unless absolutely necessary. Focused solely on himself, on his job search, on rebuilding something, anything that resembled his old life. And as much as I desperately wanted to believe he was trying to move forward, to heal, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was building something else, something darker, something I wouldn't see coming until it was too late. I'd thought I could hold everything together, that somehow, miraculously, I could fix what I'd broken. But Mark wasn't the same man anymore. Neither was I. And the more I tried to mend the shattered pieces of our life, the more I realized they might never fit back together again. The apartment, once our sanctuary, our haven in the chaos of New York, now felt like a battlefield, silent, tense, every glance, every step, a calculated move in a game I was losing, badly. Mark had always been a man of few words, but now his silence was a weapon, sharp, precise, devastating. He didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't even look at me most of the time. But his coldness seeped into every corner of the apartment, turning even the smallest, most mundane interaction into a brutal reminder of what I'd done, of what I'd destroyed. One night, I was clearing the dinner dishes, the silence between us a physical weight, when Mark sat down at the table, laptop open, fingers poised over the keys. He didn't say anything at first, just started typing, the soft clicking of the keys the only sound in the oppressive quiet. "What are you working on?" I asked hesitantly, desperate for some semblance of normalcy, for any crack in the ice. He didn't look up from the screen. "Job applications." I nodded, a pathetic, weak gesture, unsure of what else to say. "That's good." He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, then said, voice flat, devoid of emotion, "David offered me a position today." My heart stopped. The air seemed to thicken, to become unbreathable. "What?" I whispered, voice barely audible. "Called me this afternoon," Mark continued, tone even, unwavering. "Said he wanted to make amends. Offered me a managerial role in one of his projects, in Manhattan." I stared at him, mind racing, trying to grasp the implications, the sheer audacity of it. "And what did you say?" I finally managed to choke out. "I told him I'd think about it," Mark said, finally looking up at me, eyes locking on mine. They were calm, Too calm, but there was something behind them, a flicker of something. Calculating. "Mark," I started, voice trembling, fear coiling in my stomach. "You can't work with him, not after everything that's happened." "Why not?" he asked, tone sharp, challenging. "It's not like he cares about loyalty. Clearly, neither do you." The words stung, sharp and deliberate, but I couldn't argue. What could I say? Over the next few days, Mark's behavior became even more unpredictable, more unsettling. He alternated between icy detachment and subtle, almost imperceptible acts of control, taking over tasks I usually handled, making plans, big and small, without a word to me, leaving the apartment for hours, days even, without explanation. One evening, he came home late, a new suit slung over his arm, expensive, tailored. "What's that for?" I asked, watching him hang it carefully in the closet, a cold knot of dread tightening in my chest. "An event," he said simply, not meeting my eyes. "What event?" "A networking gala," he replied, tone dismissive, not bothering to elaborate. "Are you going alone?" I asked, the question barely a whisper. He glanced at me then, expression unreadable, a mask of cold indifference. "Does it matter?" I didn't press him, but the pit in my stomach grew, a cold, heavy stone. Mark wasn't just shutting me out. He was building a new life, a life that deliberately, pointedly excluded me. And as much as I desperately clung to the hope that we could somehow, someday, find our way back to each other, I couldn't ignore the growing chasm between us, the widening distance that felt insurmountable. Meanwhile, David kept trying to reach me. At first, I ignored his calls, his relentless texts. But one afternoon, worn down, desperate for some kind of connection, any connection, I finally answered. "Sarah," he said, relief flooding his voice, "I was starting to think you'd blocked me." "Maybe I should have," I said, tone sharp, defensive. "Look, I know things are tense right now," David said, voice smooth, practiced, but still laced with a persuasive warmth. "But I meant what I said. You deserve better than this. You deserve to be happy." "And you think you're the one to make me happy?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, a beat of silence that stretched, pregnant with unspoken promises. "I know I can," he said finally, voice low, intimate, seductive, "but only if you're willing to take that step." I hung up without another word, hand shaking as I set the phone down, the dial tone buzzing in my ear, mocking me. David's words echoed in my mind, insidious, tempting, pulling at something deep inside me, a buried longing for a different life, for the life I'd once thought I wanted, the life I'd briefly, foolishly believed he could offer. But every time I closed my eyes, every time I imagined leaving, starting over with David, Mark's face flashed in my mind, the anger, the hurt, the quiet, devastating disappointment in his eyes. Could I really abandon him now? After everything I'd done? After tearing our life apart? The breaking point came on a Saturday evening. Mark was in the living room, surrounded by a chaotic stack of paperwork, going through bills, bank statements, things I couldn't bear to look at anymore. I finally snapped. I couldn't take the suffocating silence, the cold war we were waging in our own home, for another minute. "We need to talk," I said, standing in the doorway, voice trembling but resolute. He didn't look up from the papers, didn't acknowledge my presence. "About what?" "About us," I said, voice cracking, raw with desperation. "About where we go from here." He finally set the papers down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at me, eyes cold, empty. "What do you want me to say, Sarah?" he asked, tone flat, devoid of any emotion. "That I forgive you? That we can just go back to the way things were?" "No," I said softly, shaking my head, tears welling up again, useless, endless tears. "I know things can't go back to the way they were, but I want to try. I want to fix this." Mark stared at me for a long moment, expression unreadable, eyes like chips of ice. "Fix it?" he repeated, voice flat, mocking. "You think this is something you can fix?" "I don't know," I admitted, voice breaking, tears spilling over. "But I want to try. I love you, Mark. I always have." He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head, a mirthless sound that chilled me to the bone. "You don't love me, Sarah," he said, voice low, dangerous. "You love the idea of me, the steady husband, the provider. But the second I couldn't live up to that, the second things got hard, you went looking for someone else." "That's not true," I said, voice breaking, pleading. "I made a mistake, Mark, a terrible mistake. But it doesn't mean I don't love you." He stood then, movement slow, deliberate, menacing. "You say you love me," he said, voice low, dangerous, eyes boring into mine. "But do you even know what that means anymore?" I opened my mouth to respond, to argue, to defend myself, but no words came. I was empty, broken, lost. "I'm not leaving," Mark said finally, tone firm, resolute, leaving no room for argument. "Not yet." A sliver of hope flickered, fragile, desperate. "But don't think for a second that things will ever be the same." "What does that mean?" I asked, chest tightening, fear gripping me. "It means," he said, looking me directly in the eyes, his gaze cold, unwavering, unforgiving. "You made your choice, Sarah, and now I'm making mine." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, frozen, the weight of his words crushing me, suffocating me, stealing the last breath from my lungs. That night, I sat alone in the bedroom, staring at the half-packed suitcase in the corner, the suitcase I'd packed weeks ago, in a moment of reckless despair, but never used. The choice was still mine, wasn't it? Stay and try to salvage the ruins of our marriage, to rebuild something from the ashes, even if it was broken, imperfect, forever scarred. Or leave and risk everything, gamble on a future I wasn't even sure I wanted, a future with David, a future built on lies and betrayal. But for the first time, a chilling thought settled in my mind, cold and heavy. I wasn't even sure if Mark would care anymore. The next morning, as the first rays of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the empty bedroom, I stood in the doorway of our brownstone, suitcase at my feet, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked back one last time, at the quiet, shadowed hallway, at the closed door of our bedroom, at the ghost of a life I was leaving behind. The weight of it all, the memories, the mistakes, the shattered promises, pressed down, heavy, suffocating. I didn't know if I was making the right choice. I didn't know if I'd ever find what I was searching for, if happiness was even possible anymore. But as I stepped out onto the Brooklyn sidewalk, the cold morning air biting at my skin, and closed the door behind me, the click echoing in the quiet street, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in the ruins of what I'd destroyed. I just couldn't